then you had President Scheinbaum. God, doesn't she have anybody with a brain in Mexico advising her? So the first thing she said, these are our people and we're going to weigh in, we're going to provide them legal counsel. President Scheinbaum, if Americans are burning the Mexican flag in downtown Mexico City and they're protesting, waving Old Glory, first of all, your biggest problem would be restraining Mexican citizens would try to kill them. He had a press conference this morning and he handled himself very well. He said, I'm sensitive because in 2020, I begged and begged and begged incompetent mayors, governors like Tim Walz. He didn't bring in the National Guard for 7 days, so I had to act belatedly, and then I got criticized. This time I'm taking no chances. And he mentioned that the LA is going to be the scene of the Olympics. It's bad press, and it was not nonviolent. It was violent from the beginning. There were people, as Trump pointed out, that were handing out expensive bio shields, helmets, all sorts of riot gears. I don't know. And the signs were pre-printed, most of them. So he went through all of that. There were all these side issues. Maxine Waters, who is completely unhinged, tried to break her way in to see the SEIU union head who was in ICE detention. And she just said, I'm a congresswoman, as if she can do anything. And they said, no, you can't. And she's, I think, and then the police chief, remember that he had that morose face in the initial when it first started, when Karen Bass surrounded and kind of ritually embarrassed law enforcement by saying, this will not stand. And they're looking, hey, this is getting violent. And so Trump likes the chief, but as I pointed out in an earlier Daily Signal video, LAPD didn't quite react as quickly as they might have. They did. Now they're on board. What's the sum total of all this? The sum total is the entire left-wing narrative has collapsed. The narrative is that there was just a lot of peaceful people walking around, and then these vicious Gestapo people snatched them, and then people who were legitimately working and wants to go, they took some time off work for a peaceful protest. There was no cars. They were not calling automatically driven cars to have them assembled to blow them up. They were not blowing up people's cars. They were not throwing rocks at cars. They were not attacking highway patrol vehicles. They were not spitting in people's faces. They were not burning American flags. They were not failing to disperse. They were not taking over 101. That's what they were doing. And so the left, it was like the 2020 optics where somebody said mostly peaceful demonstrations and the flames were going up. There was a good scene on CNN or MSNBC where they said the same thing, and there was a car on fire. So I think that the left now, and what do I mean by the left? I'm talking about Representative Torres, who said, get the F out, ICE of my, and then Karen Bass, we won't stand for this. And then Gavin Newsom, this is chaotic, this is reckless. And then a lot of really weird stuff he said. Hey, Tom Homan, come and get me. Kind of rugged, just a punking him. And then we had his tiff with the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent. We might just withhold federal taxes because we pay $80 billion more than we get in services from the federal government. I thought he was Jefferson Davis, maybe. And then he said, and that pays the federal government's bills. Come on, Gavin, it's little over 1% of all federal revenues. Why don't you just realize that you're polling 27%? 2% want you to be the nominee. You're going nowhere, and you're blowing up what was left of your viability politically. You're going to be termed out. What are you going to do? Because people are looking at you, and this comes on the heels of the fire in Los Angeles, when you couldn't say a word about Karen Bass junketing, or the deputy mayor phoning in bomb threats, or the head of Water and Power has no idea why the reservoir is dry, or that fire chief who was fired talking about DEI, why there's hydrants dry, or why you wouldn't let people clean up their hills of fuel for the fire. So it's just a 1-2 punch, and Gavin Newsom is in big trouble. The biggest trouble, though, is the whole illegal immigrant deportation, because there was a CBS poll that showed that 54% still want deportation. That rises to 75% when they're told they're violent criminals. Then they said they were just sweeping people off the street. They went into an employer who was trying to create an illegal alien workforce, and among the people people that they arrested, they were, charged with assault, charged with attempted murder. There were some terrible people. And so as that all gets out, the left then looks ridiculous. And now what they're doing, they're not only getting money from these NGO, nonprofit left-wing that are, by the way, we're paying it for it in California, $45 million in taxpayers' money. But they're not only getting riot gear to hand out to people, now they're handing out American flags because they're thinking, somebody called up and said, hey, I'm a U.S. Senator. I'm supporting you. I like what you're doing, but you're making it impossible. I got an election coming up in November. What is this? So, suppress the Mexican flag. There's also an existential question. I mentioned it on Laura Ingraham the other night. I mentioned this 20 years ago in Mexifornia. I had a student, and he was waving the Mexican flag during the controversy over Prop 187, and they were burning the American flag on the Cal State campus. So I said to him, why are you waving the flag under no circumstances of the country, under no circumstances you want to go back? And you're burning the flag of the country that you say you want to stay in, even though you're here illegally. And he couldn't answer that. And so it was so weird to see these people spitting on the American flag and burning it, and then Mexican flags everywhere. And so is it confusion, or do they think all these Mexican flags say that LA is now part of Mexico and they are trying to remind everybody? Look at the illogical emotional response and see if there's a logic to it. So if that's true, all these young people that are either here illegally or the children of people who came illegally, for the most part, maybe parents were legal, maybe they were legal, but they may all had one thing in common. They said that Mexico was not for them. So they come over to a different paradigm, completely different. Its history is completely different. This is not Spanish Catholic conquistador colonization. Remember, the Spanish crown would not let anybody, unless they were Catholic and Spanish, go into their colonies. And the vast majority were males. The LA riots, they keep saying, somebody gave them the talking points. NBC, all of them say, peaceful, 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 peaceful. And you think, what are all these cars burning up? The only funny thing about it was this guy, totally incompetent, he takes a big gas can on, I guess, a hot engine, and he pours it around, and he's acting really smart, and the other guy thinks, well, I'll light it. And I don't think he's ever been around autos, because the whole thing blew up in his face, and he was lucky he didn't blow up everybody. But that's another sign of an incompetent. There were some celebrities out there, too, that wanted to get their smell of tear gas in the air, but it was pretty pathetic, and all these things on the left are pathetic. At some point I was thinking, when I was watching everybody saying this is peaceful, as everything was taking over freeways and hitting policemen and lighting cars, and one guy had a hammer and he was just breaking all the windows, those big heavy glass windows in the police precinct. Another guy was taking a hammer and hitting parts of the building to break up rocks to throw, and I thought, and they're still lying and saying it. I thought, wow, think about it. We had Trayvon Martin, that he was just this young strapping little kid that happened to be wandering around when George Floyd came up and murdered him when he was, I don't need to get into it. Then we had Jussie Smollett, that Kamala Harris, oh, this is terrible. And he paid two people to slightly beat him up and charge white people with white. And then we had the Duke lacrosse, remember that? All those people, they raped this poor black one, and then she admitted that was false later. Then we had the Covington kids that were berating a Native American Vietnam veteran, combat veteran. Remember that? The guy had never been to Vietnam during the war, and he started and staged the whole thing. And I can go back even further to Al Sharpton and Tawana Brawley and that whole bit. It's just, and then we can go into Russian collusion, laptop disinformation. They never stop. They never say, okay, we're lying. We got to stop this because we've destroyed. Instead, they said, we caused a lot of chaos and we took a lot of time out of their schedule, and that's good because we are morally superior. Any means necessary are justified. So we don't care if they're true or fabricated. Nobody ever apologized. Kamala Harris said, I'm so sorry what Jussie did. He misled me. No.